All right, guys, welcome to the Express.js Technical Committee meeting. This is for June 26, 2019. Been probably approximately like 6 months since our last one, just based on things going on. We have a couple agenda items that we're going to try to go over in this meeting. So first, we're going to give kind of like a little bit just update from some of the stuff that was in the January 23rd meeting. Then we're going to talk about participation in the Node.js package maintenance working group, which Wes has been kind of like representing us on and doing a lot of work there that he'll share with us. Another one that we'll talk about will be the OpenJS Foundation's cross-project council. So it's kind of like preliminary, but Wes will kind of like go over a little bit of information there, figure out like how we want to, as the Express Technical Committee, interface with both of these things and what we're doing around there. So yeah, I mean, we'll kick it off real quick with just some quick status updates. So one of the things that we talked about in our last meeting was the Express 5.0 release. So as a quick recap, we had kind of basically came to the agreement, we're going to take basically what has landed in 5.0 and basically say like, that's what's going to be 5.0. And we weren't going to sit here and continue, for who knows how long, landing all the stuff that was incomplete. And so 5.0 was going to come out after the next minor of the 4. So 4.17 was the minor that came out, that was released. And so at this point, we're getting ready for the 5.0. We have a pull request for, getting documentation up on the website in the 5.0 area. Basically, the really only thing that was like mostly done, but was basically the last thing to get in there, which Wes has just semi-recently pushed further towards there, was the update for basically path to regex, which was our path matching module. So it has various tweaks on there, various bug fixes and changes around there. And that was basically it. So we basically got that PR updated, and now it's just the mechanics of probably going through and getting that merged, getting the documentation for that, getting that out into because right now it's an alpha whatever number. So that we'll get it up there as a beta.1, get all the website up there, and basically barring anything of that, we'll probably just shove out, especially once we get the website out there so people can actually like mess around with it. Then as soon as the website's up there, basically we'll just, re-release it if there hasn't actually been any like changes as just RC0, and then re-release that literally as 5.0. And that will basically be what 5.0 is. And so there's a pull request in the Express repo, which basically has all the stuff. I believe I should have checked it real quick here, but I'm pretty certain I went through and I deleted all the lines for all the stuff that wasn't checked off, that we kicked off from the last one there. So there won't be a bunch of lingering things in that list any longer.
I think there's a few maybe left, but that's fine.
Yeah, well, I'll take another look here.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a couple, I think, things that came up like basically right when this is what always happens. Right when a release is happening, suddenly it's just like magic, right? New things come up. So there's a couple issues that come up that could be in a 4.18 minor, but whether that's that, I'm just going to ignore that for now. So we're putting basically to put the full effort. We're going to put the full effort forward to getting the 5.0 out there, and then come back to that stuff. And we can still put a 4.18 minor. That's perfectly fine. The idea is that 4 will still be supported even after 5 comes out, especially as people start using it. So that is kind of like a generic
So I have a question. So the docs, we're going to merge it. Do we have a list of key things that are changed that we need to document?
Yeah, I mean,
Is this 5.0 checklist effectively it?
yeah, I mean, it's really the checklist slash the actual history, history file. I was going to help go through that as well, just to make sure we didn't overlook anything. I mean, docs are nice because they're also very malleable. You know, we have a separate repo, so we can always correct mistakes after the fact. I think what we're going to probably have to focus on the most is probably just, you know, especially the couple things that are the main changes, which I think there's going to be some of that pathing stuff. I think is probably going to be a little bit confusing. So, I mean, we're probably going to have to, you know, keep updating docs as people find things, but we never really had great docs for the pathing in the first place. So, I think that's just thinking about, you know, major things like that. That's really it. There's a bunch of stuff removed, but it was already deprecated in the previous one. So it's not like their removal will be a sudden change with 5.0, unlike, you know, the pathing changes, which of course you can't really deprecate them in the previous and blah 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 blah. So, you know, we'll put a migration guide out like we did before, but there isn't a lot to really migrate. And in that, we'll probably renote those things that were removed that were prior deprecated to be like, hey, you know, if you were using this, you know, do this pattern now, basically. That way we'll get people out there with a migration guide. But that's probably really it. You know, obviously people will give us feedback, but yeah, I don't see it being too big.
So there's a PR in the website repo for that. You know, I just need to do a final review of it, but I think it's ready to go. That's more or less just a clone of the of the version 4 docs. And then, you know, so I'll need, you know, you guys to take a look at that at some point, and then we can, you know, start actually having real docs for 5, because it's more of like a placeholder essentially. I think is what's in there.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that in an issue, but I think having the docs being the list, I think will help people also better realize that it's there and a thing. Because I think someone made that in a comment. I think Wes, you were just finding that in that thread too. It was in the Express issue tracker where, you know, it really, a lot of people seem to not really want to try it, partly because it says alpha, which, okay, I guess. But then, you know, I think it's mostly just like, it just feels not as real, I guess you could say, where I think it's like hard to really articulate it, but I feel like that's kind of like what it really is. And so like probably putting it up on the website and having like it very visible is probably going to help in that regard, especially like, you know, we'll kick off the beta 1, which will basically be the final, the merge of the pathing and all that stuff getting in there.
Yeah.
And then as basically once we do that, then we'll probably focus on cleaning up the docs. And I don't know if there'll be any real, hopefully people will give feedback, right? So I'm hoping that just getting the initial docs out there, even if it's not necessarily complete, people will hopefully give some feedback.
I think we will. I mean, I mean, the amount of, well, this CSS looks a little bit off that we get. As soon as they see the 5.0 docs, I imagine people will be excited, but also just be like, hey, this doesn't seem right. Oh, I tried it and this was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, the main feedback. Go ahead, Rand, sorry.
Do you think we should put some kind of a header, like warning or something in there? Just say, hey, these are sort of the placeholders for 5.0, but they don't, or for 5. You know, the version 5 release, but they don't really reflect the API, so that it doesn't really just completely confuse people.
I mean, the thing is that the 5.0 is very close to 4. It's going to be really strange changes. So because, I mean, clone of 4, I think that like we might miss things that were deprecated that weren't removed, for example.
Yeah.
And there's probably a couple other things in there, but yeah, I think it's close enough where we probably don't need to. I was actually thinking
Okay.
even the opposite, where we might even want to put a banner up on like the homepage after that to say, hey, go check, we like 5.0, docs are on here. Go check out the release, give us your feedback on it. Because the main thing
Yeah.
that we're looking for feedback, especially because just making for sure we didn't like totally wreck someone's like use case of it, right? I think that's really the only real feedback that would really
Yeah.
come from it. Is just like, hey, you removed this, and now now literally like, we can't do this thing anymore, or maybe like you totally wrecked this super popular plugin. Maybe, I don't know. Hopefully it isn't
Yeah.
much because we cut some stuff out. I know what's going to come up that Wes is probably going to mention based on reading my thing about the package maintenance WG. It's not like there isn't like a giant rewrite of a lot of things in here, especially as it relates to like, raw HTTP2 support. I say raw support because, I mean, that's down to the Node.js level, right? Ignoring any kind of like 2-to-1 gateway sitting in front of your app. But yeah. So
okay. All right. Well, that's good. I'll yeah. So after I land this PR for the website, maybe I will go and add a little like alert thing on the homepage to say check out the the alpha the version 5 alpha docs or something like that, just to so that it's not sort of hidden.
right.
And then
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be good. I think it wouldn't be the worst thing to say, we're looking for contributors. If you find something, say something, or something
Right.
like that just says like, we're still working on these. This is a work in progress.
Yeah.
Come help, in whatever way
Yeah.
you can.
Okay.
I think that would be a good thing to add.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. I'll put something like that in there.
Yeah, and it's not quite along the 5.0 lines, but you made me think about it, Wes. That I don't know if we want to put that somewhere. So you probably saw, I think it was yesterday or even today, someone made a comment in that pull request that like, dropped all the node supports or whatever, and they're like, you're like, well, we're not using anything that needs that, and then the person's basically like, well, maybe you're not using it because you support it. Well, it's like, yeah, like I think like basically like our view is really like, well, we can drop the support when it's necessary, right? And it doesn't seem to be necessary yet, but they seem to be the opposite direction. So, and of course, like just like a lot of those things, a lot of people just want to jump right on to all the syntax things rather than actual things. So, but like I didn't know if like it's kind of related to 5.0, but not really. Like it's like a meta thing just to think about. Like I don't know if like we should like have a place in the contributing or something like that might spell out more like what some of those philosophies that we have is, of like, hey, you can absolutely make a PR that doesn't work in the old versions. Like that's what starts the conversation of, hey, you know what? It's valuable to like make this kind of like fork here and say like, we're going to release like Express like 6.0 and it's only going to support 8 and up because there's this valuable feature that it needs 8 for and it's worth it. And we're going to support 7 for a while anyways. So, you know what I mean? So,
I mean, I think at some point there's going to be a performance issue where we can just use a new feature and it's going to be more performant. Like that's going to happen at some point.
right.
I feel like, and that will be a good place to stop running the tests. But I feel like stopping running the tests, unless you're doing it intentionally for a reason, like we are introducing this feature and it is only supported from here. Otherwise, what's the point of even dropping the tests? Like it doesn't change anything other than if users are afraid, like you mentioned, Doug, saying like he's coming from the other direction.
Right.
We could have that discussion. But I guess I could see that side of like, well, I want to make the tests pass, and so they may change the way they wrote the feature instead. I don't know. It's a little bit of a half, 6 of one, half a dozen the other. Like,
right. That's what I'm saying. Like it might help, like if we have it like written down somewhere, so at least people could see it or whatever. The other thing that made me think about with that too was we actually did run into this issue with 4, and I thought about it a while ago and I forgot to bring it up, but we'll probably want to do that, like keep that in mind this time too. So for example, when Express 4 came out, right, it bumped it up to 0.10, which in that time that'd be like bumping it up to 8 today, basically. That'd be kind of like almost like the equivalent, right? So what ended up happening was people kept using it on Node.js 0.8 back then, even though it technically the engines was set to 0.10, but it kept working until a bunch of releases later, suddenly it used set immediate, which wasn't available then. And then people were all complaining. And of course, like even if you told them, well, it's always said that and NPM was warning you, like they're all like blah, 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 which I get the frustration, right?
Yeah, well, so how did that feel to deal with? Was it like a big burden? Because like if it was, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say it wasn't a burden. I think it's more like just realizing after the fact. I think that people were surprised by it. So basically, like, basically what I'm trying to say is I think, like, you know, if we bump the version up, which I think we should, to at least 4, because I think that's like the delineage of what I would call a modern Node.js, that we should have some mechanism that literally during the require statement would fail in some way. So either it's a syntax fail or literally we make a throw in there. But I think like,
so I've seen that before. So
make it work.
So because you can check, you know, the node version in the process. I've seen an app that does that, and it really bothered me for some reason because it was so artificial. Like it was like, oh, it's just like Chrome or Google Hangouts saying we work in Firefox. Like if the code runs, let it run. Like, you know.
Yep.
Now we could throw in a big warning and just say old versions of Node are, you know, insecure and have worse performance, and make a big banner. You know, that would be, I think, reasonable.
Right. Yeah, it's just something that, and I'm not saying we have to solve it right now, but it's just something that is definitely something to think about. Of course, if we actually use something that then doesn't work, that's really the best case, because then it's like, look, like it doesn't work in there because it's doing this thing that needs to happen.
But so we could, so I do think this is pertinent to the 5.0 discussion. We could add some sort of banner, big deprecation warning thing, and say this may break in future releases without a major version update, and call that the breaking change. And then at least we would be getting the word out so that when we add it, we don't necessarily have to wait until 6.0, because we explicitly said we stopped supporting it, and we made sure that, because a deprecation warning that is thoroughly disruptive, to me feels a little bit like a breaking change already.
Yep.
You know, like if you think about the buffer change, all it was a deprecation warning, and everybody opened issues everywhere, right? Like, what is this? So I feel like if we put a warning there, I think that might be good enough.
Right. Yep.
For now.
And like the other reason I don't like the artificial one too, which, like you said, it rubs me the wrong way, partly because, you know, then you're sitting here like sniffing through the version and trying to figure it out rather than just, yeah, like I remember back like a long time ago, you might remember if you're a Node still, like that it was the engine's declaration was a really big deal. NPM would not install if it wasn't compatible. But of course that was in its own mess back then. So that's why it got changed, because it was actually a disaster when, say, like we migrated to 0.6, like nothing would install on it. It was awful. So I get why they had removed it, because it's a hard thing to do. But also, Node's a lot more stable now in the APIs in a lot of ways. So, like, you know, that's why like Express just says, you know, greater than or equal, and all our modules say greater than or equal. It doesn't say no, only up until this version, because that's all we know about. Well, it's like we're just declaring it optimistically. We're saying, well, it should work in the future versions, and you know, whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, so
okay. Cool. If we're on board, if you're on board with adding a deprecation warning, I can open a PR that does that.
Cool. Yeah. Like I think. Oh, go ahead and like open a PR with what that idea is, and so that way we can. Like,
okay.
discuss about it and like, you know, get it merged or whatever. And like I said, it's just going to be like the beta anyway. So I mean, we can always. It's not like we can't change our minds or anything like that. But that way, we'll get the conversation going around that and
For sure.
get something landed. So that'd be cool.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. So another thing that we had discussed in the previous meeting was about the scope modules. Wes had actually did some legwork and got us access to the scope of at Express. So previously I just had the scope at Express.js, but now we have the scope at Express. So I believe like during our conversation, I didn't rewatch it, but just from my memory, like we talked about those different scopes and stuff and what we wanted to do there. You know, and even just the other day, I was thinking about it because, you know, I think an annoying part about scopes is scopes was added to NPM in the middle of the O.10 line. You know, it's kind of annoying. You know, especially if you talk about like requiring modern things. I mean, scopes are basically just a thing. I mean, there's still some tooling that kind of like throws up on scopes, but less and less these days. And I think it definitely makes a lot of sense. The more I kept thinking about it, I think the more it makes sense to stop, you know, being in the global namespace, because the global namespace is just like a constant like fight, I guess you could say, of like who has the things. So if you didn't notice, Wes, since we actually had that conversation, the Happy.js project had like flipped itself to scopes. So they had just went with the really like hard, quick way of doing it. They're basically, he just like republished all the current versions, I think, of scope. I don't remember if he bumped the version numbers or not. And then he just put a deprecation message on the non-scope one. I think we probably couldn't do the deprecation at least for a while anyway, since we're still going to be supporting like the 4.4 line for a while. But I think that, you know, we probably should pull the Band-Aid and convert to scopes. I don't know. I think that what we should do is probably one of my thoughts was like probably like after we get 5.0 out, like maybe we should flip all of our middleware to scopes. You know, the middlewares that we have, because there are some middlewares too that we need to trim. So like, for example, there are weird middlewares. Like, so we have Express-session. I think the only official middleware that has the Express prefix. There's one of the things we have in the Express.js repo, connect-timeout and connect-multiparty. Both of those still have that old connect prefix. So, I mean, there's some cleaning up that we could fix there finally, you know, as part of that. And other ones where we can get rid of. So like there's the cookie-parser middleware, which ideally we shouldn't have. Ideally, like that came from back in the day and age where like the idea was like you'd have to compose these middleware, but then the downside is people have to. It turned out it was difficult for people to remember, oh, I have to use the cookie parser and I have to put it before this one, because we don't, at least currently, have any like way to declare those dependencies. And so what ends up happening, so over time, things like Express Session and stuff have made it so you don't have to do that anymore. Basically, they would just read the cookies directly. So there's stuff like those kind of like that kind of like module where it's probably completely unnecessary to have anymore. So like those we don't have, then we would not move those over, for example. So that would help with the line.
So I was wondering, didn't you have a repo that you had moved some old things to we weren't supporting anymore?
Yes.
Could we maybe move some of those over there as part of this?
Yeah. So basically, the old Vision Media account, which is turned into which TJ had renamed a sloth. So yes, anything that's basically going into the dump. I mean, we can move there. We could always make another, you know, org in GitHub called like Express.js deprecated or something like that. Move them there. Because
I'm not sure how important. So if they're deprecated, so for example, namespace hasn't been updated since 2015. We could look at how many installs it has, but I feel like, well, it even says this project is dead in the README. So like, it doesn't, like this kind of thing. I feel like we could move it wherever. I don't think it really matters. If anybody's using it, I'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Or at least as the moving of the repo matters, because, you know, let's be honest, we should break them if they're that's maybe a little bit harsh, but I feel like that's a not something we should spend too much cycles on.
Exactly. And really all the moving and whatever isn't necessarily about like that we care, that we like, really it's just more like, so that way when, you know, the idea around the moving is more like you go to our organization and then what's there is the actual things versus like you have to like sift between cruft and not cruft.
Yep.
You can archive repos now, which is a thing, but I don't think it really like makes any kind of real difference in your org list. So that's kind of lame. It'd be cool if like if you clicked on archive and it was like a super, like maybe it sorted them to the bottom all the time or something like that. But sadly,
yeah, it's interesting. The type here is all by default when it should be like all except archived or something. Right. I see what you mean.
Yeah, because then it would be kind of neat, because then we wouldn't have to really move them anywhere. That's the main reason we're really moving them, because you can archive them, people can't then make new issues and stuff and then be annoying. So that's solved already. Like, for example, I go through the Node.js org as an example, and there's just so much stuff in here. It's hard to really tell what exactly is active, what is not active. It's like, sure, maybe not, the org is not the best way of discovery anyways, but still. I do see there's a little archive badge, which is what I figured is all you got, but still. Anyway, that was, and so that's kind of like the thought there. Another thought is we could probably just delete the repo altogether. It's not like it's uninstallable from npm or anything like that. So it's a hard thing with these stupid cruft things. So
yeah, I agree. It's like, you know, it's just a chore to, like, you know. But I think there's a lot of benefit in the moving the middleware. I really like that idea. It's becoming more and more common for ecosystems to have their namespace like that. And so I'm like, I brought up the idea in the first place because I like the idea. If we want to move forward with that, I'm fully on board and will help participate. I think it would be really easy. So I have a project where I did do this, and I wrote a little script that published under both. So it would, you would do the publish, then it would create a branch, and then change the name of the repo, and then publish again. Which is one thing we could do. I could genericize that if we wanted, and we could just start using that. Because we could maybe even go through like a full major version supporting both if we have automation that makes it easy to do.
Right. Yeah, it's like, especially your point of like having an ecosystem where they're prefixed it. I mean, you know, we'll certainly come on this much harder too. Like, part of what, you know, I think one of your things with the working group discussion, but also I think like even after Express 5 will be the, I know I put like this long thing in one of the issues in the Express.js, but it's like part of the whole, what are we going to do about HTTP2? And so if like rec and res and that kind of stuff changes a bunch there, like right now,
we need a good place for those to live.
Yeah, our middlewares are kind of generic at this point, right? They basically work on like raw Node.js thing, and basically Express has always operated where it's basically just, you know, some extra methods on there, but you know, maybe that will change in the future. I feel like it probably might in some ways, and so then our middleware starts to become more like, well, it's this Express pattern middleware. So it makes a lot more sense then to have the delineation and not be like, well, it's just for anything Node. It's really like for this part of the ecosystem. You know, and it doesn't seem like that's like going anywhere because I think Node's general consensus is still the let the ecosystem build it. I mean, I'm following a few discussions in there that they're still like that's being said, which not saying it's wrong or not. I'm just saying like that's the current attitude. So I mean, it sounds like that's kind of like what they're looking for to happen anyways. So
Yep. Makes sense, I think, from their perspective. And I think it makes sense, especially like you said, when we do rec res, that if we just, I mean, we're not going to get requests, obviously. We're not going to get response, probably. So if we came up with another name, it would be hard for us to get that in the global namespace. And I think it would make a lot less sense than just saying @express/rec or request,
right. And like to your point, I think it was your point too before, was crap. I forgot what I was going to say now. Your proposal, like, and I think that we should, even just the routing changes kind of thing. We're talking about like returning a response, right? So that whole pattern, right? So like, if we do end up going down that kind of a route pattern, right, that will probably definitely change how middleware is made.
Definitely.
And probably won't be easy. Like basically, once again, that would be another thing where you can't now just have a generic like Node.js thing and you're not just passing a rec and res, because you're going to have to like call the middleware and then you might get a response object back and then you have to convert that like all yourself. And at that point, even if you could technically build the plumbing, that's the kind of thing where it's still kind of like, well, now it's almost like a separate kind of an ecosystem. So like I said, once again, like all the things are pointing towards this, stuff. And plus, fixing up our names, like the ones where we have like some prefix with Express, some prefix with Connect, some, a bunch not prefixed with anything. And so trying to get that all squared away.
Yep.
The reason why it's not squared away is because that is just the fight for global names.
Right. Yeah. And then one other slightly related thing. So I've been working on a new generator. I haven't really mentioned it much. I mentioned it maybe in one issue, but I am trying to take so NPM introduced at some point, I can't remember which version, a hook where if you do NPM init and then a name, it will look for a package called create dash that name. So like create express or something like that. It also supports scoped, so you can actually say npm init @express, and it will go and find the package @express/create.
Interesting.
So my hope was that we could publish the generator I've been working on, which I was working on under a different name, but as @express/create, and then that will hook into that ecosystem, which will just, it follows a pattern that a lot of other things. So for example, the reason create React app, which is a fairly popular thing, is called create React app is because of that feature. So you can type npm init React app. So in this case, you'd be able to say npm init express, which I think would be great.
Because and I did see that comment. I know I didn't really reply to it, but like,
it's fine.
It's definitely, I think, the correct solution. I think there's a clear, obvious desire that people have to have a generator. So we'll never not have a generator. And so part of that is that probably helps us a lot get rid of some of the boilerplate. It also decreases steps. I saw that Rand just merged the use the NPX PR. So that, removes the global installing of it. So that hopefully that will help things like that and tying into the npm init.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the big thing that I wanted out of it, though, and the reason I started this at all, the generator really, I mean, it was written at a time and with ideas that were really good at the time, but now they're just a bit stale. So, for example, like initializing less, like it's just not even very popular anymore. Should we have it? I don't know. How do we add TypeScript to the existing generator, right? Like that, I looked at how we would do that, and it's not trivial. So my goal was to make a new architecture of the generator that let us evolve it a little bit better. So I can share the code, but I don't want to go too far into it because we could talk probably for a while about what I'm doing with it. But the idea is I'm doing a little bit more of a composable approach, and I'm letting you build templates. And so the templates could be like, we have a whole TypeScript template, and it has its whole own structure for whatever TypeScript users expect, right? Which is and it's a totally separate template from the bare bones, template, which just has like a index file with the Express app in it, right? And then I have also two other templates, one for a HTML app, which I think that's one distinct use case we have that is different from like a JSON API. And I think what you do in those apps differs in my experience. So I assume people probably also have very similar things where they aren't often shipping one that serves both. They're probably shipping different apps, that one's a JSON API and one's a HTML app. So I have two templates, one for each. Again, and we could extend that or decrease it or figure out something better. I was just trying to get them out there to start the conversation. So anyway, I want to present that at some point, but it's not quite done yet.
Yep. Yeah, and like I said, I did see the link, and yeah, like there's a lot to talk about, so I didn't like it, but I think they're all great things because yeah, like just all your points are definitely on the correct, like made a different time. We need to improve it, et cetera, et cetera.
Round of ones to publish under the namespace, and just because it gets the benefit of being, npm init Express.
Right.
So
cool. So I mean, that was, I think, most of our topics from last time. So I know as our time gets closer and closer to being done, I know we don't want to miss like at least talking about the package maintenance working group. So I'll hand it over to Wes here to talk about like what kind of stuff's going on there. He has a whole big post about it, and there's a lot of information there as well. But
yeah, so okay, so I'll start off with just a little description of what it is, and then why I got involved in it in the first place, and then I'll talk about what Express and its relationship could be, and then we can see if we like that. So I had talked with a couple of people on Twitter at some point about how we have a lot to do in Express, and sometimes we don't have like a lot of people who contribute, like really meaningfully contribute. And so it'd be nice to try to figure out how to grow some of that. And Michael Dawson was pointed out to me as a person who was starting to work on this from the Node side. And so I don't know if he was really the like founding member, but like he kind of organized this idea of setting up a working group to deal with package maintenance in a way that is similar to like the problems that we face, right? So years after the projects are written, sometimes the maintainers originally that were there are gone. Sometimes some projects like Express have become wildly popular and not necessarily scaled the contributors as the popularity has grown. Others just have had like either the maintainer just totally ditch the project, or it go out of popularity, and there's still some people who need it. So there's a lot of these different use cases where there's no long-term plan from the Node side about how to maintain the like large module ecosystem that is npm in the long run. So the goal was to put together a group of people who care about the idea and can come up with a plan to help the long-term health of the ecosystem be maintained. So there's tons of facets to that, and the group is trying to figure out which ones that we think we can help with and which ones we can't. But the first step was, let's identify some people we can work with. So I think Matteo Colina from a bunch of things, but also an Express contributor, Express competitor, Fastify, is also in the group. And he had mentioned that he said he thought it would be a good idea to find what he called friendlies. So these would be people who are available to discuss what their package ecosystem needs, not just random authors, but like people who might actually be really willing to help. So I volunteered myself at the time to be there for and to try to represent some of the Express concerns that we have, and that turned into, we ended up with coming up with a plan to do a 3-phase rollout of whatever programs that the working group does. And the first phase was pilot partner. So I said, I'll volunteer to be a pilot partner on behalf of Express. So that basically meant we were going to fill out a questionnaire, which is the issue that I had opened, that talked about our problem. So the group had somebody propose the questionnaire, and then basically I took my sweet time, but it is finally filled in with some answers. So I would like for us to maybe spend a little bit of time and just go through those, but maybe in a minute, just to say, yes, we like the answers that I've given, or no, we should make some changes. Because the second phase is to, based on our answers, go back to the working group, come up with a plan to help resolve those, and then work a little bit with us to make some progress on those. And then the second phase of the bigger picture is that what we find from this pilot group will then be open to, I think they were calling it like impact, or no, that's the CPC. We have a term for the second phase. I should know what it is, seeing as I'm the one who originally came up with the idea. For projects that are not maybe the pilot ones. Oh yeah, it's high impact packages. So this would be things that have large number of downloads, a big dependency tree, and have a lot of users to support, kind of stuff. And then the idea would be, those are the ones that would have the most effect on the ecosystem. We'd work with them. So the goal from these questions is to really establish a set of things that the working group can help us with, and then actually try to like follow through on getting that help. So that's sort of the idea. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or anything on that.
Yeah, and I know you were doing that. I think it's a great idea. Like I said, I did read a little bit through there, but haven't had time to really like go and like discuss it. Plus, I figured we'd have this meeting first, anyways. But yeah, I think that having like that, if you're participating on part of Express is a great thing. And I think we can use a lot of things. I think I told you this before, I am subscribed to their repos, so I see all the conversations happening, all the issues there, just to kind of like, keep up a little bit. I just saw recently they wanted to like basically like move this one module into their thing, and they're like, well, we're not in the business of taking over the modules, just helping with maintenance. And I was like, and because at first I was kind of like thinking that was a little weird to take them over, but yeah, I think that it's good to see like that there is some steering in the trying to figure out what their focus is, but yeah, so I don't know if you wanted to note some of those things, but like,
yeah, I can do that. So if we're good with that, let me pull up the thing. So there's a bunch of questions, and some of them, I'm not entirely sure this questionnaire was necessarily the most well-structured, but...
Well, like I said, I think they're still kind of figuring out what they want to do. I mean, that's part of being a pilot.
Totally.
We're going to have to deal with and help them along, so.
Yep, totally. So the first question was, what are the biggest problems your package needs to face? And so I said that we have a long history and a strong focus on feature support, and because of this, we have struggled to make new updates while also keeping up with the other things like docs, support requests, security updates. Correct me if you feel like I'm wrong, but I think that that's sort of the number one thing that has stopped 5.0 is just time, while doing all those other things, to also do our due diligence on the features moving,
Right. Yep. And I think that you had gotten that just fine, because yeah, like especially the support cases. I mean, it's funny because we actually don't even we probably deal with less than half of them, because a lot of them are still shelled out for things like Stack Overflow and stuff. But like, especially compared to some of the really big communities, we have zero insight or control over all of that stuff, which, for better or for worse, right? Because we also, the downside too, because I've talked to people about the same thing, is they'll go in the post on Stack Overflow, and then someone will give them this answer, and people will look at the answer, but inevitably even though they tried their best, right, that probably wasn't the best answer. And so leading people down this weird way, and it's like we can really moderate or anything like that. So that's, of course, the trade-off that we're basically doing right now is even though we're actually dealing with a bunch of support requests in GitHub, we're ignoring all the other channels and just letting it be what it is, which can probably help with probably contributes to additional friction. What we have going for us is the number side, right? Just like there's so many people using it, there's books about it and stuff, and they're generally well done, which is why people are able to get up and going without really contacting us. But yeah, like just the other day, like someone asked a question. We don't really have too much bandwidth, but I mean, I definitely can see where they're coming from. They basically said, hey, like I basically was confused. I tried to do dot status and chain it to dot redirect, but then it like changed the method, which the way it's implemented and stuff can make sense. The downside is I never even thought about that. It never really, I mean, a lot of people, I probably never realized that, but I mean, whether or not we're going to change that is a whole nother conversation besides just like, well, what are their expectations? Like, our docs, even though we have actually pretty good docs, is still like on the tiercer side. We don't really, there's not really a good explanation of stuff. It does say like things like will chain, but it doesn't really give a definition of that. And I looked at the redirect one, and it's kind of says it will default to this status, but doesn't really explain it, So, you have stuff like that. And I think that's one of the benefits of, having like, if we actually were all tied in with the support in a general case, because we can actually get that feedback chain coming up. And the only real feedback chain we get there is the ones that come direct to us. Any other thing, or maybe there's some common issue or friction point we don't really know about because we're not involved in those other channels because we can't be. We don't have bandwidth.
Yep. So one of the things, so maybe I could add here that we are looking for people who can help in all these other channels and bring back bring the best practices or the ideas back to the group for discussion or something, something to say, like, that's really to the point of later I say, like, we need more people involved, like on a regular basis.
Right. Because like I said, it's not even that we're just to say like, hey, we need people to literally help people. And that's not really what it's saying either, right? Because it's more like just like I can stay like subscribe to that repo and at least follow along what's happening. Like if we don't really have any kind of like linkage for like someone who has like time and probably like inclination because they like doing it. I know there are people like doing it. I had a coworker who is obsessed with Stack Overflow and answering questions on there for points. So I know, like, and I'm not, everybody has different things. So I know there are people like that. So it's like, kind of like, yeah, how do we set up a channel where it's not like, it certainly doesn't really interest me. Like, it's just like a lot of things, right? We probably could do it, whether or not it's interesting, but then like also it takes away from other stuff, which.
Yeah, well, so that's part of, so I do have a solution, some solutions at the bottom. But I think so in this case, I think this would be a great thing to say, like, look, we're looking for somebody to champion being Express's presence on Stack Overflow. I guarantee you we could get somebody to volunteer for that, right? And just say, like, we don't want you to do anything else other than be on Stack Overflow, answer questions, and if there's something that's particularly interesting, bring back the feedback to us, Like, we could ask for that. I'm sure we could find somebody who would like to do that.
Right, because once we have like people like who might be interested in doing that, like then that would end up spurring us to create some kind of like chat channel for the technical community to necessarily talk about, like whether Slack these days or we just keep the Gitter or whatever we do. But like, because that might be a question. It's like, well, what do you have? It's like, well, we don't have something because there's nothing to do on it right now. It'd basically be like a ghost town, which is, we do have Gitter, and we have the private spot in Gitter, but we don't really do much in it because there's no.
Yeah, I don't know why. I have Gitter on my phone. I just never open the app for some reason. It's like not my default clicking.
Yeah, no. But yeah, we would just end up probably making a Slack thing.
So for what it's worth, there is the Node.js Slack, and I do participate in that recently. And there's an Express channel in there, and so I try to help people in there. I've answered a few questions. Again, that though is not really helping because it's a little bit of a ghost town and not public. Like it's not like Stack Overflow where that helps the whole, like you might find it in Google. So, but anyway, it's there.
But yeah.
So anyway, let me move on a little bit. Yep. So we have most time-consuming tasks. I say triaging, which you know, I say time-consuming, but it's the most time-consuming that doesn't have a clear output for the project, I guess, because a lot of times it's not really time-consuming. It's just I've got 5 seconds, answer, you know, say no, please go post on Stack Overflow, but it is it's the cuts, you know, the million cuts that kill after a while.
Yep.
And then I said, what are the most difficult things to implement in your package ecosystem? So I did mention that we, like Doug, you and I had talked about automated release stuff. So if we can get to a place where we're really starting to expand the contributor base, which you know I think is a good goal.
Yep.
We would need this. So I actually talked with with Michael Dawson, who's the working group lead guy, and he mentioned, and this is what ended up with me doing the cross project council, is that as a member of that, even though we are a member at large, but you know we could change that if we wanted, they do have resources. So what a resource could be CI servers, right? It could be some build processes. It could be, you know, there's things we could ask for as a member there.
I got
you. Help move some of that forward. Maybe there's other ways to do it, but you know, the easiest is like set up a Jenkins job. So like if somebody could set us up a Jenkins thing, then, you know, and we didn't have to do it ourselves, then that seems like a good way forward. But you know, we could figure something else out there. So that's why I mentioned that. I don't think I put anything else really in there. Security. I mean, because technically we don't have a lot of technical problems right now. Like other than the project itself, right? Like how do we do 5.0, or sorry, how do we do HTTP2? You know, how do we do promises, that stuff? But we don't have anything that like somebody outside the project could come in and help us with, other than some of these sort of release processes.
Right. I think that's kind of like why it was kind of like, I think that was one of the reasons it was decided just for the time being, like at large, for example, as a declaration. Like, because even when you bring both of those up, they're not like critical things, like especially the HTTP2 one. Like just as an example, right? Like the main reason you want HTTP2 down to their thing is like if either like really is if you want to use something like a push promise specifically. Other than that, like especially when you talk about production infrastructure, like there's so much stuff that basically makes up for that, you know, yeah, I think HTTP, like basically like until like browsers like Chrome and Firefox start pushing new features, just like they have started to do, just like they've been doing a little bit with the HTTPS stuff, where they're basically like, nope, this feature literally won't work unless it's over HTTP2. Like there isn't really a purpose even in local development environment. Sure, it's nice. Basically, it's a nice to have, which is kind of like where it's stuck at. At least it's not in the same ditch that IPv6 is in. But it's actually going out there. But still, you know, that I think, and that of course is what's slowing things down. I mean, I noticed that too in just the Node.js core. So remember they added HTTP2. There really was some people who use it, but the masses are not using that. Then they made the compat layer, mostly because I bothered them to do it. And I actually see most people who do use HTTP2 and core do use the compat layer, not the real layer. Makes sense because it's just easier to kind of like understand a little bit. But even that, I still regularly see issues where like they literally make something not possible to do. And it's one of those things where I think like it's hard for me to articulate it, but I mean, it basically has a feeling where it's still clear that most people are not using it. So you're finding issues where, we probably should have found out a long time ago if it was really being heavily used. So it really indicates to me that they're definitely, even though it's fully supported in core, it still has a pretty low usage, because I think like I said, a lot, like even when I see stuff deploying production, one, either I'm deploying places where literally I can't even use HTTP2 anyways because of stupid infrastructure requirements and stuff like that and restrictions. But even then, where typically like I can still do HTTP2, but it just like translates into HTTP1 ahead of time, either something I can't prevent or it's just easier to do. So I think a lot of people are like that, right? I think a lot of infrastructure is like that still, which certainly affected, I think, the true demand for HTTP2 in Express. Because I know there are people, I mean, if it was really critical, I mean, it'd be a stampede at this point.
Yeah, and it's a trickle at best.
But yeah,
people saying, "Hey, where is this?" Sometimes I think people only say it because we had it on the roadmap. To be honest, I don't know.
Yeah, well, so I've talked to a few people who have said it before too, and like, yeah, it's on the roadmap / they feel like they want it, but since they use Express, and so they feel like their only way to, even try it is it has to be Express first. So therefore, they don't even know if they need it or want it, basically. But so because they want to try it, and like remember that a lot of people who use Express 2 are people who like aren't really back-end developers either, right? They're like front-end, other things like that. And so like it's not like, they're going to sit here and like stand up like say a reverse proxy Nginx or something either, just to try it out, because even though it might be quote simple, it's a little bit beyond. I mean, it's basically why actually Node.js has been so easy for front-end developers. It's because it's self-hosted. You don't have to like set up an IIS or like an Apache like as a service on your machine, set up a whole site, which is basically what you'd be asking them to do to try out HTTP2 at this point. So that's kind of like where usually the value add comes from. But yeah, so and I know you put that in your bullet points at the bottom, identify, because like, that they're looking for the technical committee, us, to identify 3 important key objectives. Where we need champions, 10 issues, just as I'm sure just all these are just, figure out numbers, but essentially
they're just random numbers. We can pick however many we want.
Right. And like also some good first issues where probably they're not, I assume by what that means is they're probably not the most super like technically involved ones, but they're just stuff that's like on the back burner because they're not hard, but it's just like meh.
Yep. Yeah, so that's exactly it. So yeah, I think this is a good place to skip to talking about this, because a lot of the rest of the questions anyway were just like fairly repetitive. So I was, after talking about this stuff with that group, Michael reached out to me separately. So Michael's at IBM, and obviously we have, had a history of stuff with IBM, and he wanted to discuss what he could do, since I'm talking with the package maintenance group, and he's like, well, IBM wanted to participate before, it didn't really work out. Like, what is your opinion on that, and what could maybe the package maintenance group do that would make anything IBM could do be more via that group, and instead of it being like directly. So these are some of this is partly from that discussion, where I just said, I think there was a really big communication disconnect back then between those engineers who were assigned to it, and like the project wasn't really ready to be a project manager for them. And so they ended up just choosing random things, and those weren't really the things that anybody cared about necessarily or wanted that day, or or at all maybe. And so like it felt sort of, I'm sure for them it felt really demotivating, because it's like, well, PR sat there forever and never got merged. It's like, well, yeah, kind of that's how it goes, because I mean, I don't know, I've been working on Express now for a few years, and I have PRs that I opened 4 years ago, and they're still not merged, but they might be, and they probably will be. but like I'm all right with that, which doesn't really sit as well with like an engineer who's paid to work on Express all day.
Yeah, that is exactly. I know I talked to someone about it before.
We talked. Some of this is coming from you.
Like, even with IBM a little bit too was
okay.
That was really where it was, because it was even, because essentially, like really it's not like that we're against them participating in anything. It was just the way it went was just like you said, communication issues, right? Like basically, like they ended up probably, I think they put it as like a project, and then like there was discussions on the back end, and basically by the time like I was able to like interject, it was, essentially too late, right? So you end up where it's like, oh, well, we're already getting these employees here and they're going to do something. And, I'm sure, like I said, like you said, like it sucked for them. Like I would hate that too. Like, hey, go work on this thing. Okay, what do? I don't know.
Yeah, figure it out.
Okay, you're going to have to do it for, 8 hours a day too.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so I think it, and also at the time, it was even like you were really in a tough place there because they were asking you effectively to be project management on that stuff on top of all the stuff you're already doing. It's like, well, that's not going to work. So anyway, so that we went a little bit about that, but then I said like, okay, well, from the project management group, or sorry, project maintenance group, what could Express as a team do to make it easier for because they have a bunch of people who have just said like, hey, I want to help with something. And so they're trying to see where they could send them on Express to help. So that's what these three things were to say like, okay, look, there's some people who are just really new, and a good first issue might be some of the docs updates, might be, some little maintenance task like updating dev dependencies. I don't know. We could figure out what those are, and change the list all the time. So that's the good first issue. Then the next step up is like, okay, you know what you're doing in Node, or what you're doing in Express, and these are our top 10 priorities to get done in the next, time frame. Again, 10 is totally random. We could have 12, we could have 2. It doesn't matter. Point is a list, and then that list, the goal would be that we pick, like somebody says and raises their hand and says, I would like to do this, and that is them being guaranteed that we're invested in actually doing that thing. And it's not just them saying, oh, I want to do this random feature. It's like, no. The TC has said, yeah, we think this is a feature worth moving forward on. Or whatever it is, updating to something is just as important as a new feature. Like it could be backporting a feature or something. So that's that one. And then the 3 key objectives, the goal there is a little bit more, I think, the big picture stuff. So the idea would be that maybe there's hundreds of issues that need to be solved under any one of those top things, but there's like discussions to be had and to be led and driven. So like, HTTP2 is a really good one, and maybe, had somebody else other than, because really there was the one person who opened the PR, and then when they dropped off the map, it was just like, well, that's not making a lot of progress right now.
Right.
And none of us were invested enough to step up and say, no, I'll finish it off.
Right. Even that, like you said, like it was really, even the PR itself was more of an effort, like, kind of like, well, we would like to have it, but like, what is the actual vision? More like, and like, is this the right vision? Besides, really, it was more like what's the minimum that can be done to get it to happen, which is not necessarily the wrong question. But like you said, you end up falling off the map. Now, like the pull request, it's not like I'm not going to sit here and close it, because it's not like I think like it's a good discussion point and things like that too. So, but yeah, like, yep, that makes sense. Like one thing I was thinking of when you were saying these things was, and I think like looking back on like where a miss was, is like it's almost like you need like multiple stages, right? You need someone to come in to say, hey, you know what? I have experience like figuring out how to like what are the things that what you would need to do if you had a community of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, hey, before we get that community involved, and I have the experience of there, like, hey, Express, like, we know these things. These are kind of like probably the ways people will get started. Like, what can you guys think of ways so we can like start to come up with like a plan before suddenly, you end up where it's like a bunch of people come and then we're like, well, we don't have anything for you to do. And of course, they then turn away to somewhere else, right? They come.
Totally. I mean, I think this is a very common occurrence in Express, all the Express packages is this. Because people come and do drive-bys, and a drive-by, when it doesn't get merged, probably turns into them going to contribute to something else. It's just the way it works. So,
right. But even then, even when it does get merged, I think a lot of it is still just like, hey, I needed this one thing and that's it, right? Like, and like even when it gets merged, it's useful, I'm sure, but like in the end, right, you're not really building up any like long-term extra people, right? Like,
yes, yep.
You really want to have multiple people who effectively all feel like they're owners, as you would say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, hey, you know what? I'm not just like sitting here like saying like, hey, what do I do next? What do I do next? It's like, you end up where like you have this core group, right? They're like, well, here's like the ideas, right? Like, just like you're like, hey, you know what? I had this, I think that the generator is not well structured and it can be modern age. So I'm just going to like go down, and do that. And then like, and I'm going to do the legwork so we can talk about it and say like, yeah, that's what we want to do or whatever, because I feel like that I'm able to do that. You know what I mean? And that's what we want to build people up to. Obviously, we're not saying like everybody will just magically be on that stage, but that's like, I think like the goal, right? The goal is like anybody who starts contributing, like we want them to be to get to that point, right? So like,
and having steps to get there, I think will just help them. It'll help it become a lot easier, seemingly easier for them. And these are, I think, the things that would do that, right? Which would be we have these. If we like this approach, I have already started on something else, which I have tentatively called just a status page. I'm not sure if that is where it will end up, but the idea is it's sort of an evolution of the badge board.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of it, so the badge board has, I think, limited use.
Correct.
Which is fine. But it wasn't meant for something crazy.
Yeah, like the status page idea, even though you haven't said it yet, I'm already excited because I have a feeling of where it's going and I'm excited. So
yeah, so what I've got so far, and it's totally rough, and I don't think I've actually even pushed it to GitHub yet, but is I have a list, I have a config similar to what we had in the badge board, but instead it goes a little bit further and actually includes all of Pillar.js and all of JS HTTP. And well, it's not really all of. I did try to not put in the ones where like they're deprecated packages or something. I tried to put in only the ones that are current.
Yeah. Once again,
but either way,
part of the cleanup and whatever. But yes, because there's a bunch hanging around in all those orgs.
So then from there, what I want to do is scrape all of the issues for all of the repos. And I want to have these 3 type of issues tagged across the whole thing. So I think, we would have 3 new tags, maybe not new, some of them we kind of already have, but so good first issue is one of them.
Yep.
And that is actually not standardized, but there's one of the people who's on the working group and also works for Microsoft as an evangelist, wrote a good first issue tool, which I think a bunch of things have started adopting that pattern. So I think it's just a good, one to follow suit on. And then have a second, the identify 10 issues part would be, we'd have another tag that are, like high priority, or, we could come up with a name for it. And then the top one would be, key initiatives or something. And the idea was we'd scrape all the repos and we could tag anything in any repo with these tags. And then they would show up in the status page. So the goal would be, we'd put it on the website we'd make it maybe in the contributors page or, you know, somewhere. We could just iframe it from a GitHub thing or whatever we want to do. And it would be kind of like the badge board where it is built. So maybe we'd put it in behind like a job and it would build every, you know, time we push to it, or, you know, I don't know when we want to do the build, or maybe we can get it to run in the browser. But what I have now was sort of based on the badge board. So anyway, we could discuss the technical details later, but the goal would be we send people there, and we don't say like, you know, but we just send like the whole working group there, and we say, look, pull from here. Anything we've tagged here is fair game, you know. And then we'd use that page to be sort of the way we drive new contributors. So if people show up to say, I want to do something, we could just link them there. So that's sort of the idea.
Yep. Yeah. And, you know, those kind of stuff is exactly what kind of like what will help out a lot too, because, you know, I think it helps out in a few ways. One, knowing where to go. Two, just further reinforcing, like, because I think that's another thing, which is kind of weird, but, you know, it's just the way it is, where people feel like if they're not contributing to the literal repo called Express, they're not really contributing to Express.
Yep.
So I think that would help. That will also help like reinforce, like, no, this is all the same thing, really, in a larger sense.
And so actually, that was one other thing I forgot to mention. Yeah. So with each of those tagged issues, I would like to have us use the GitHub assign feature and assign them to their champions. So if somebody steps up and says, I'm going to do this, and then display it on the status board. So this is the whole, like, some people are there just to get their name on the thing.
Right.
And this would be the way that they could do that, right? So even if they're not contributing, quote unquote, to the Express repo, their name is on the Express website saying, look, they're a champion of this big priority we have.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Basically just trying to like help people feel more like they're contributing, even if all they're doing is like labeling the issues even.
Yeah. So that's actually one part of it too, is I would like to get to the point where we have something, and I don't know what it, so labels. So by the way, because you've had to add me to a couple of things because I wasn't able to label them. I don't know what the permission is on that, but it does seem like it's more than maybe it should be. But maybe we need to make a group in each of the orgs that's just like labelers or triagers, and we just onboard people to that like really quickly. You know, as soon as they get good at it, we just say, here you go, you're a labeler. You know.
Yeah. As far as I know, it's just quote write permission to the repo. Like GitHub doesn't really have it very granular. But yeah, like, and that's kind of, some of that's kind of spelled out in there.
Hey guys.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Right.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I have to drop. I have to go. But
all right.
I think these are all great ideas. I think I'm totally you know, for the idea of getting more people participating in the project, and I definitely think documentation is sort of a good gateway drug, as it were.
Exactly.
Because it's relatively easy for people to contribute, and you know, so anything to do to help facilitate that, let me know. But I can't stick around anymore right now. But I will be. I'll be, you know, trying to stay a little bit more involved. I was kind of out of the loop for a while there, but I'll be trying to check in a little bit more regularly. So
awesome.
Anyway,
cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
I got to take off.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks.
But yeah, no, yeah, I think it's all good ideas. Yeah, I was gonna say we'll probably have to end it soon, anyways.
Yeah, I have to head home.
But yes, I think that like, because that's like a big thing. I think that will help. I mean, that's, you know, that's always like, I think like part of the. I mean, in some ways, right? That's part of like the package maintenance working group. If you want to feed that back to them, because I think that.
So that's actually my goal. So so the tooling part of it actually won't, I think, be owned by, I say owned by, but whatever, it'll all be open source. Just, it won't be under the Express repo. My goal is so I actually just created a new organization on NPM and GitHub called PKG.js. So I'm going to start writing the tool there, I think. My idea with that was just it would be a set of things to help package maintainers
Right.
Whatever that might be. So the first thing I was going to write was this status page, and then the idea was you could just pull it in, add your projects, and then it would generate the status page for you.
Cool. Yeah,
so that's the first thing there. And then I was going to, propose that as a tool for the working group to, take over or participate in. I don't know what is going to, as far as maintainers there, what's going to happen, but.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good thing too, because like I have some ideas even around that kind of stuff too. So like, there's a bunch of stuff, for example, that's duplicated in a bunch of the repos.
Yes.
Especially as I was thinking about like part of the thing, there's a proposal, and I think it's better anyways in some ways than like Travis. And I know Microsoft is working on it. They just recently got GitHub login integration for like Azure pipeline, but then like there's a whole bunch of stuff you have to keep in your repos. So like there's definitely, I think, like stuff that having a central place, but like putting it in our repos is kind of weird. It's annoying. Craft.
So these are the exact things. So if you want to participate in that, by all means, I haven't even pushed a single repo to it yet. But yeah, we could kickstart that, and then maybe take some of the stuff that we're going to use and just send it back over to the working group, because I think that they have a lot of really interesting ideas, and there's a couple of people who have written some like proof of concept tooling, but it hasn't been the ones that we would use. So I would like to get some of our stuff as one of their pilot partners, like actually do a couple of implementations that we can use today, and then say like, look, here's this with this. Is there a way to make this more available to everyone else? So that's that.
Cool.
Because I have part of the other thing I was thinking of adding to that is a couple of other generators. So I say generators, I mean that kind of loosely. So like, so I have a create package JSON package as well that is sort of a more advanced package JSON generator instead of just npm init.
Right.
And I also have a Git one that does like sets up a Git repo and does that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure where that fits in. I've already published those, but I might try to come up with some common toolkit that can help automate some of those, like I need to do this in every repo things.
Correct. It's basically like the reason why people turn to a mono repo with like a bunch of packaging in it is because I feel like, and I think that they would kind of agree, like having one repo per package is the better option, but it's a lot more overhead for the maintenance. So
a lot more, yeah.
The downside was actually really annoying in other ways. So
I just yesterday one of the things I was looking at was the semantic release. I don't know if you've seen that before.
I've heard of it and stuff. I've never really
there's like a conventional change log project or something. Anyway,
I've heard of that too.
Yeah, so those are actually related, and I was trying to figure out, like I was going to try to see if this was a possible option for some of these things I'm working on. And I went into the repo, and it's this mono repo, and I had no clue where to look. Like every there was like 100 packages in this one repo. There's even a conventional change log settings for Express. I'm like, I don't think that has anything to do with us. I don't know where they got this, but it's in their repo somewhere.
They did. I've heard of conventional changelog because they did propose using it for Express at one point.
Okay.
So that's probably where it was. That was probably their POC that they were showing.
Gotcha. Okay.
But
I don't think I saw that. But yeah.
But yeah, so like, yeah, I think at the time, the current pattern was that the commit would actually add an entry to the changelog.
Yep.
In itself, so therefore made it basically not very useful, at least in the current pattern, right? So that was the only reason why it wasn't using it today. But that
no, I'm not even trying to say that we should use it necessarily. Right. I was trying to figure out the tool. The main thing was the mono repo just made it horribly difficult for me to figure out what I could do and what to use. So I really like our approach, at the cost of the fact that we really need to figure out a better way to roll out Travis CI version to all the packages. We need to, which versions it's tested in. Like, we need to have certain packages, if we're going to update versions of them, like we should really just run a script that opens up PRs on every repo for all the same dependency. Like, that's the stuff that we don't have today that I think would be pretty easy to write. Like with a little GitHub API call and some script that detects which ones we want to do. I think it'd be pretty easy. So that's what I want to write in that PKG.js organization, is just some of those little tools that will help us do that. Also, README updates. That's one thing. I would really like it if our projects had README consistency. And I know that's sort of abstract, but like, they're all structured in their own way. And sometimes it's hard to tell, what sections we should have, and what, I don't know. Anyway, I feel like there's some consistency problems.
Yep,
that we have.
I agree. I know some of the projects had moved in and stuff like that, and they used to be way worse than they are now. I've gone through and tried to go at least within each org itself, not necessarily between all the orgs, but just within each org, try to make most of them all somewhat similar. And the hardest part is like, it still was manual, right? If there wasn't like tooling to just say whether or not it's good or not good. And like, then if we want to add a new section, like say we want to have a license section at the bottom that says a license, well, like, how do we know if it's which ones it's missing from? Or if there's a license section in these ones, but one is a link to one is a link that says MIT and the other one just says MIT, like, getting it consistent. So
yeah, and if we wanted to add, some sort of like, moving over a little bit to this CPC idea, the cross project council, they have this list of things that they want to ask the project to do. And some of them are things like add the logo on the project. So like, for us, what does that mean? Does that mean the repo, just the Express repo, or does that mean all the repos? Like, what is the level there? And if it was all repos, I literally said this in the meeting. I said, some of this sounds like it's going to be really time consuming. You should be very careful about what you ask, because the reason we would participate in this would be to get more resources, not to have to do more stuff.
Right.
But if we had some tooling that was like, oh, you want us to add that? Like, great, sure. Like, new section in the README template, and then it just opens a PR to all the READMEs. That'd be great.
Yep.
So that's the stuff I want to put in there, and I think that would help, and that would be sort of participating in the working group and also being directly applicable to, the day in of Express. So that's my goal.
Sweet.
With that.
Yeah. Do you think we should just go ahead and just set up a follow-up meeting here?
I do, because we didn't really talk about the cross project. So, yeah, and even just talking about like what level of participation we want with the rest of the working group, we didn't really get. But I do need to go home, because now that I have a baby, I'm.
Do you think we should just do another one next Wednesday or Wednesday after?
Well, so that's like 4th of July, right? Is right there.
Yeah, that's right. It's not on Wednesday, but yeah, it's basically.
Yeah, it's Thursday. So I'm only worried. So I'm actually going to be out of town, but I could do the meeting. But I will be in a limited internet connection some of these days next week, and I'm not sure which ones off the top of my head.
Gotcha. So let's I'll just schedule one for not next week, but the week after. And then what we'll probably do is, with all this going on, maybe we'll just do one, we'll just have one each week.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. I mean, we go over every time, so it's certainly like we have plenty to talk about.
Right. Yep. Awesome.
So I will be traveling on the Wednesday of that week, I think, just so you know. So if that's when I'm coming back. So I'm not sure. I think my flight is.
Yep, we'll figure it out
in the morning. But if there's a time, anyway.
Right, we'll figure it out in our thing. But all right, well, well, I think that probably ends our technical committee meeting. I'm gonna end the broadcast here. So we'll have another link for when our next meeting will be, if you guys want to check that out for anybody who's watching this. we have a lot of stuff to discuss and things going on, it seems. So, all right. Well, thanks for joining us.